This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to the Eden Falling Lore podcast. Join us as we delve into the structured settlements, the dangers of the overgrowth, and the concept of permadeath, where every decision matters. To start it off with, can everybody here tell me a little bit about life in the Afterfall?
Yes. So everybody speak at once. So Eden's Afterfall is a pretty tough environment. The lore calls on the idea that the world's being terraformed. So vegetation is, let's say, rapidly changing in some areas and slowly changing in others, where it's becoming very toxic. And that toxic vegetation leaves off spores into the atmosphere that are harmful to humans and some other creatures as well, and create an environment that requires actual countermeds, basically tox meds, to survive in, depending on how much of the toxins you actually take in as you wander around the environment. The afterfall itself, to try and wrap your head around it, people have vacated the cities, the metropolitan areas, some 60 years prior, when the asteroid fragments came down. They didn't destroy cities for the most part, although there were some big chunks here and there that caused problems. But mainly it was a seeding event, that where these chunks came down, things started to change. Vegetation started to mutate, and people started dying because of the levels of toxins in the air. People fled those cities and basically went to the outskirts of the cities, into suburbia, and look for buildings that they could take and hunker down in. Over time, those buildings, more people showed up. They ended up building outside the buildings and creating what we call settlements in the game.
And just to piggyback off of Mike, in these settlements we've several tech levels. It's not necessarily you're going from Terminator to the Flintstones. It's just the amount of tech that's available to you in that certain tech level. And another thing that we wanted to mention is, because we're 60 years out in the Afterfall, 99.9% of the populace does not remember the world before. We have pieces of it. We have lore of it. It's kind of part of the big discovery of the game in the Afterfall. But its day-to-day life is like day-to-day life for us now. Like we're happy with our tech the way it is. We got our laptops, we got our cell phones, we got our smartwatches. To them, what they have is all they basically know, because, like I said, the lifespan has changed in the Afterfall, and so now you're 20, 30, you're an old man, kind of like in our great grandparents' age. So just a little bit more of the lore of the world we've created for you players.
Yeah, and actually, to your point, Andrew, that's one of the things I told my artists, because we had to disabuse them of the idea that this was a Mad Max kind of
Yeah.
post-apocalypse. What I did to help get that across, right, is to show them the setting. The best way of thinking about it is techno-medieval, socially and everything else, right? Because what you get, right, with a most post-apocalypses is across the artistic genre, you get something that's like techno-barbarian, right? It's this dark age of technology, and everything is a conflagration of conflict all the time. Nothing is settled and everything. But no, it's techno-medieval. Everything has sort of gone through its fall of the Roman Empire stage, right? You've gotten out of the early Middle Ages, and analogously speaking, and now you're in that settled period, that neo-feudal kind of future, where people live in these fortified, close-knit settlements, and they have their supporting structures adjacent to them. You've got almost like castles with the size of the settlements, really, and the fortified gatehouses and everything.
Matthew, are you saying, are you really saying we put the settle in settlement?
Yes, we did. And in fact, you could almost think of it that way, is that this is where people, after this period of horrific uncertainty, coalesced together. They started to forge alliances and relationships, and you have a depopulation problem, right? in the medieval sense, analogously speaking again, the toxins act almost the way that Black Death did. It's this sweeping environmental factor that you have to live with, that you just try your best to get through the day, with whatever weird methods you use to fight off the bubonic plague. Or you have people that are specialized. Their job is to deal with this plague. It's not a disease in this case. It's a toxin mutation type of material that's out there that's causing the environment to go haywire. And that's just
Yep.
part of daily life, the same way that bubonic plague was. But not only that, the cartel functions as a facilitator of these allegiances that are happening. It's very feudal between the factions and the groups that they're holding together, right? They facilitate both the allegiances and the hostilities. That's what got the idea across to my artists. It gave them the aha moment. It's, oh, this isn't Mad Max. This is like Norman keeps on the coast, and then the Black Death happening all across Europe. This is a depopulation problem that can't maintain the infrastructure, but where it is maintained is actually pretty vibrant, right? They're doing what the Romans did to the best of their knowledge. And that's the Tech 5 type of situation, right?
Yeah,
You know,
with
you
that
could
though,
think of-
let's put the tech levels
Mhm.
kind of in perspective, because I don't want people thinking like it's medieval. So
Right. Yeah.
in
This
our
is a
world that
social
we really
commentary.
live in now, let's assume that we're like tech level 3, right? That's the level that we all live in now. So with all the gadgets you have, in your house and stuff, if you're in a developed country, you're tech level 3. So imagine before the apocalypse comes, we reach tech level 5, which is substantially ahead of us. So that takes, Blade Runner, cyberpunk, all that stuff becomes reality, right? So the world is seriously populated. There's, electronics galore, holograms, all that interactive stuff. Everyday life is turned into using machines to create your food and stuff like that, and do a lot for you. But then the apocalypse kicks in, and then we get to this point where these people are fleeing the cities and forming these settlements. So as Matt mentioned, the settlements have different levels of tech, and to try and wrap your head around that, one of the examples I used recently is, let's call it going tenting, right? So as we live in our Tech 3 homes right now, and you pack up your tent to go out in the wilderness, you're going to take certain tech items with you, right? Most people don't go bare bones without cell phone or anything else. They take what they feel is essential tech with them, be it battery chargers or whatever. You're taking that essential stuff. And the place that you're going to stay in, the tent, well, that's subjective to the camper. You can have anything from those little burrow tents to, like I was telling somebody, like I go tenting and I have a 4-room tent that I set up, right? Really rough it. So the ideas of our settlements are with that thought process in mind. I take a lot more tech with me when I go camping than the person that's going to crawl out of one of those single person burrow tents, right? I got, electric ice chests, solar panels, all that kind of stuff, right? Because I deem those as necessary to make the process enjoyable. So put that into settlement perspective. Tech 5 settlements are living just about like real people lived in the world before the event happened, in what we call the pre-fall. So they have all the cool stuff, everything's available to them. And in many cases, it's nostalgic. So they might still be listening to commercials and, watching videos that were pre-fall, because that nostalgic nature of things makes people feel good. Now let's ramp it down. So we also have tech level 4, 3, and 2. Let's say tech level 2 is that burrow level camper, right? So in their settlements, they have the bare essentials of what's necessary for what they deem as tech, right? So they might not have as many holograms and a big cinema and, all that extra stuff that, the Tech 5 community has. But they still have the essentials, right? So like us today, most people feel their cell phone is an essential. Imagine these people when they set up their Tech 2 settlement, their food machines and stuff like that. The algae wafer machines and the NutriPaste machines, those are essential, right? Because who knows how to cook in this time period, right? So they're relying on these machines to do the work for them. And there's many other things as well. They'll have air scrubbers and stuff like that to keep the toxins out of their particular settlements. But again, technological level is something just to think of it like, you got this massive amount at Tech 5, and then it scales down a little bit for each tech level below that.
Would you say, Mike, that it's almost it's like a metric of how much of your own energy you can offload onto the technology that you have? Tech 2, you're doing a fair amount of your own. Well, you're roughing it a bit, even though you've got your cell phone, the kinds of tech you have. But Tech 5, it's like you let the Roomba do everything.
Exactly.
All
Yeah,
right.
it comes down to
Yeah.
prioritization, right? So imagine a new settlement that's forming. Are they focused on defense or growing,
Mhm.
or what is their focus, right? Some may be focused on, we want to live just like our ancestors did, while others are like, this is a new world, and our focus is, we're creating this commune where we can have change and relax and not rely so much on a lot of that other stuff.
Back to the medieval analog, you had exactly that historically. You had people in France, the Gauls, who wanted to live as the Romans did and kept a lot of that going. Then you had people in Britain that were like, well, we'll go back to more of a Celtic non-Roman way, or Anglo-Saxon invasions. And so they had a different way of life and different cultures, but roughly similar tech if you think about it. Swords are swords. But in our case, a computer's a computer. A hologram projector is a hologram projector. It's just
Yep.
how much of it do you have that's doing more of your own labor, as opposed
In
to
some
what are you
cases,
doing?
condition too.
Yeah.
Maybe the lower tech level communities. Maybe some of
Mhm.
their equipment, even though it's the same stuff, might not be in top-notch condition.
Right.
It
Refurbished,
might,
as it were. Mm.
the Band-Aid and bubble gum thing, might be working for some of them.
I'd say a fair amount of MacGyvering would occur.
There you go.
Yeah. Always an opportunity to throw that verb out.
But the moral of the story in the afterfall, these people, they're new generations. This is what they've grown up in. They're not living in an, oh my God, this is the apocalypse type of environment. And they're making the best of what's there. And lastly, probably as we want to move on with another topic here, think of those people living in those settlements. Off in the distance, you see the skyline of the old city, and you've been told all your life, don't go there. Super dangerous. Don't go there. So almost everything that's associated with that is either hand-me-down knowledge from, maybe your parents, but most likely your grandparents at this point, or stuff tied in mysticism, where, like somebody might say, can you believe they used to have roads that connected all the cities, and people, drove on those? That might sound like crazy talk, in an environment where you're having to drive on dirt paths and, crossing creeks and stuff like that, think of it more like, late 1800s, early 1900s travel, but anyhow, I think that should give you guys a decent idea, I think, of how our afterfall exists.
Kind of like the Donner Party, but nobody's eating anybody because they have enough NutriPaste to go around.
Yeah, exactly. Thank God for NutriPaste.
Ah, shucks.
So,
There goes my
so
dinner
earlier
plan.
you guys mentioned the overgrowth and the toxins. Could you guys talk a little bit about that?
I'll lead off as normal if you want. So, in with the impact, or let's just call it the explosion that takes place with the asteroid in high altitude over Earth, as it's coming in to impact, it explodes and chunks start raining down. These chunks actually, create a situation on the ground where early on the mutations start pretty rapidly. And people see them, and in some cases, like normal government stuff, don't worry about it, it's no big deal, and then it escalates to, we got it under control, and then it's like, stay in your homes, that's the safest place. and and then eventually it deteriorates from there if it gets to the next level. So the overgrowth, the world's being terraformed. It's something that at this stage humans don't think they're going to be able to stop, so they're trying to adapt to it. They're trying to clear it back where it's not right next to their communities, clear it away from well-traveled roads and things like that. But the interesting part of the overgrowth is it's also used the toxic plants that are in there that are emitting all these toxins into the atmosphere and causing a lot of issues. They're also necessary to actually be part of the formula to create the tox meds, which actually reduces the tox blood count, that you have going on. So as a settler or people living in this world, you're taking these either herbal remedies that consist of a variety of herbs and some of the toxic plants, or you're having a refined version that's made through chemistry that pretty much uses the same kind of stuff but maybe a little more potent. So it has its uses, but it's super dangerous to be around. And winding that back into those dangerous old world places, the old world cities and warehouses and fuel cell depots and all those other things. The toxins that are given off by the overgrowth seem to coalesce in areas like that. So when you move into those areas to adventure in there, per hour that you're there, the level of toxins is greatly enhanced, right? So you're breathing in a lot more of them. So protective gear will help to a certain extent, but it doesn't totally protect you. So having a variety of meds and stuff like that to sustain there is important. And again, it's one of the reasons why most people, as Matt, had spoken in the past here with the medieval idea with these settlements, most people that live in this modern world don't travel very far from their home, right? They just like in medieval times, 12-mile distance would be a long ways. Most people would never do that. It's a lot like that in these settlements. So most people don't go into those old places, although there are adventurers, there are migrants that are traveling between the settlements and stuff that are dealing with this overgrowth, that bring stories about it, stories of mutations and bad things that have happened and things like that.
I do want to say that there are marauder gangs that are spread across in and about the settlements, and some of them have taken a reverence to the toxins. Some of them kind of worship it. Some of them have created whole religions around it. And some of them have just grown alongside it that they're immune. So there's also that at play as well.
That's an interesting point. We hadn't talked at all about the Marauders. So we mentioned briefly about factions, and you can read a lot about them on our website and stuff like that. There's a lot of political groups. But the Marauders themselves, there's a lot of them too. And they're not just like bandits on the road. Many of them have settled in settlements. So, they also, very much like the factions, have a viable presence in trade. And somebody was asking me this the other day, like what's good, what's bad. It's like, every one of these groups that live in this world feel they're doing the right thing, right? It's the other guy that's wrong, just like in our real world, you're doing the right thing for sure. It has to be the other guy's wrong. So none of them look at themselves as, no matter what their beliefs are, as being wrong. But they do, in many cases, like Stephanie mentioned, many of them take advantage of the environment one way or the other, fully embracing it, one way or the other. Even some of the factions like the steppe tribes, who are your survivalists, naturalists, from the old world, they were the first ones to come up with herbal remedies, right, to help the survivors out. They too have embraced it to a certain level. They're not gone as crazy as some of the marauder groups have, but they've learned, as a survivalist, what you need to do in your environment. And when the environment consists of this toxicity and overgrowth that's pretty dangerous, you have to work around it as best you can.
One of my favorite things that Steph bringing up about our factions and our marauder groups is they all have a history, each to their own, that you as a player, if you choose to, you can go and find out the history of the founders, how these gangs came together, how these factions came together. And when we're talking about that, for those of you who might have already played, we also have what's called the reputation wheel. It's a reputation system that certain factions are opposed more to other factions, and it's kind of a wheel with opposites and ones who share ideas. And the more rep you get with one group, the less you might have with another, and it's totally up to you how you want to play that game, which is one of my favorite mechanics that we've created for this. Is the total, like, again, it's the reputation system, and it's totally up to you how. And there's so many ways that can change reputation, from taking contracts to screwing over the guy who gave you the contract and selling it to somebody else, or I don't want to give it all away because you're going to discover it as you go on and play. But the history of these groups and these factions is really spectacular, if I might say. And so is the reputation wheel, which I just love. So I just want a little nugget out there for you folks.
And you may wonder how that plays into the overgrowth, but imagine you were in an environment, where you're wandering around the map and some of the territories close by are all overgrown. So it's kind of restricting your movement. You either go through these dangerous areas, or you may end up staying in the area you are. And to build on Andrew's idea, you might have been like a freedom fighter. That's what you think, and you like their political makeup, and you've been trying to take contracts that enforce that, but suddenly overgrowth starts kicking in a terrain that blocks you from getting to some of your favorite settlements that are freedom fighter related. So now you're stuck doing contracts and things for maybe their allies, or even people that don't particularly like them. And the way the reputation wheel works with that, like Andrew says, everybody's got allies and everybody's got enemies. So, just like in the real world, there's no way to please everybody. All your actions, some people will be happy, some a little less happy, some extremely angry, and some maybe somewhat angry about what you do. And it's just the way it is. And life within Eden's like that. And in some cases, the overgrowth, the environment, will actually force your hand where the path you want to travel, just like in real life, may be blocked in some way, and you might be forced to take a detour. I'm sure we all can relate to that, in our own lives, one way or another.
A fun thing to bring up, and this kind of goes along with what Andrew and Stephanie mentioned, right? At the back and forth of the reputation and everything, the give and the take, and being near these overgrowth centers, right? This epicenter of overgrowth. Some gangs have embraced it, but the players actually can too, to a degree, right? You sort of ride the line between how much you allow your character to become, as it were, toxicified, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you do in doing that is you lose humanity, but you gain certain bonuses that get you just close enough to being feral, that if you cross that line, you lose your character because you go feral, right? And so it's interesting how a lot of these gangs that Stephanie has been involved in creating and everything as part of the design team overall is a lot of that culture that they have of riding that line, that they sort of exist on the peripheries of the acceptable norms that the factions kind of represent, that's what's really fascinating about them. And that's why, kind of, rolling along with Andrew's point, is that the give and the take, the good and the bad, whatever perspective you take, you can always kind of go as extreme as you like, depending on how you want to play your character. That's what's fascinating about it.
Exactly. One of the other things too we hadn't hit on when it comes to the overgrowth, I had mentioned about the toxins that it's spewing into the air, changing our atmosphere. What we haven't mentioned though is the events that get triggered because of that. So there's everything from like firestorms that can take place that is, think of it like there's so much toxins in the air that they spontaneously, combust and cause this firestorm that could burn down a community or burn down some of the places where, you went to get loot and you think it's still there and you go back and find out it's been destroyed because a firestorm took it out. So the overgrowth, major player in the way the world is. And just like the rest of Eden Falling, it's totally uncontrollable. Each of your games will have it do its own thing. You won't be able to predict what's going to take place.
Now, I know our game has something that a lot of other games don't have, and that is permadeath. Can you tell me a little bit about our game's permadeath?
This is one of Andrew's favorite topics.
That's because he's morbid.
Yeah, no, I'm not that morbid, but I really love this because it's such a rarity in the world of video games where you're dead, and in our game, you die, you're not coming back. You can do rerolls if you're lucky enough to get a destiny point, but one of the cool things that we've created to not piss you off as a gamer is you can promote your companions, you can promote your android NPC, you can promote your own child if you choose to raise children in this world. Although the cartel access program, if you don't have enough money, you may not be able to raise that kid by your own. But it is so neat that our aging system is you will age out of this game at some point. No one in this game lives forever. This ain't Super Mario. You don't just push start again. You're dead. The character you created, he's dead. So like I said, how we overcome that is one of your companions can be elevated to your next main player, and they will get all of your knowledge and information that you work so hard for, putting in all those hours into this game and learning so much about this world. Your companion, it's almost like, let's say you're with a loved one and they're towards the end of their life and they give you their life's diary. And they say, this is yours now, take it and run with it. That's kind of what the companion system is. And if anyone else would like to talk about that, that's awesome, because I just think this is so cool. And when I first joined this team and I learned about that, I was like, I've never seen that in a video game before.
Yeah, I'll build on that really quick from a rules standpoint. So first off, for clarity, if you have a human or android companion, you can promote them to continue your campaign. But if you have a couple of spiders or something like that, you're not able to promote an insect or animal to be your character. So just so we're clear about that. And as far as like the carry on knowledge, when you do have companions, regardless of what they are, you're able to train them up just like you train your character. So part of what takes place is as you spend what we call build points, which are like experience points in typical games, you'll be spending those to maintain your character's attributes, maybe to fight old age or to get stronger or faster or whatever as you progress. But you can also choose to spend those on skills, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. But with that, you can also choose to spend points on your companions to raise their skills. And the interesting part is when it comes to human or android companions, imagine that our leveling system, if you want to call it that, it's based on skills rather than actual levels. So if you're like into guns and you have firearms, right? You would start out at level 0 with no firearm skill, and then you can go 1, 2, 3, or 4. So level 4 you'd be a master of firearms. So imagine that you had a companion, a human or an android, and you wanted to train them up on firearms since they don't really have it or they're not at your skill level. It's easier as the master to train them faster and cheaper than it is if you don't have the skill and you're trying to teach them something new. So the cost in the game is half the BPs, and the time to learn is very quick. So, but the caveat to that is no master can train somebody else to be a master, right? So you can train them up to one level below what you are. But in the case of your character's coming up, on a situation where you'll probably retire them, you might start spending quite a bit on promoting your, skills that to your companions so that they have a full repertoire of skills to carry on the way you like to play. So that's one way to do it. And beyond that, the companion system is very complex. They are not pack animals, so to speak, where you can just load them down with stuff. Well, technically you could, but they could get pissed off at you and leave and take all that stuff with them. Because they act like regular characters being played like by a human. So they might not do exactly what you tell them to based on how you treat them, how well you pay them, all that kind of stuff. But it all plays into, the permadeath idea. So going back to the main topic here, permadeath in the game, your character dies, they die, but there are a couple caveats to that. So as you do things in the game, you gain what's called destiny points. And think of it like re-rolling what just happened to your character. So here's a for instance that really happened during tabletop play testing. It was comical, sad in a way, but very comical. So I had just introduced vehicle rules, and one of the players that was we played for like 18 months tabletop testing. We were like 6 months into a campaign, and this guy took his character, she's a female character, and drove up to the gates of a settlement and was going to sack the settlement, right? So jumps out of the vehicle, runs up to the two guards that are there, starts shooting at them. But unfortunately, the way the initiative went, the guards got the jump on him, and the character dies. So he had like 3 destiny points. So he used 1 to re-roll it. Character's still dead. And what he's re-rolling is the outcome of the hit, right? So was it a deadly hit, or was it, a miss or a light wound? Long story short, it happened 3 times in a row where he kept failing to roll. And then he threw a sheet in the air, like, oh my God, his character is dead. But he did come back and play again with a sibling of that particular character. But the long story short, in most cases, the destiny point usually gives you that second chance to avoid a situation, whatever it is, a misfire on your weapon, or in this case, getting killed, right? Where you have that second chance. One thing we don't allow in the game is what's called save scumming. So as you do stuff in this game, as soon as you do it, it's updating your save, and there's just 1 save file for your character. So the idea here is to make your character do things that you feel the character would want to do based on their background that you roll up, and B, makes sense. So one of the internal jokes that we have all the time is, you have this brand new character, he's got a knife, maybe like, some basic armor vest or something like that. He leaves town to go out into the wilderness, and the first thing he encounters is a bear. And like all of us gamers, if it moves, it must die. So you pull out your knife and you charge the bear, and you get killed. Because, like in real life, if you charge the bear with the knife, you'd probably get killed. So the moral I told everybody early on when I was trying to teach them like how this game plays is, would you really want to attack the bear with a knife in real life? And if so, what do you expect to get? It doesn't have any pockets. It doesn't have a gun or magic loot in its pockets, right? If you kill it, you're going to get some meat, maybe a skin, right? So the moral of the story in Eden is to play like you think you would if you were that character, right? Would you put yourself out on the line and, be that person that attacks the bear and hope for destiny points to save you? Or are you playing the runaway cards, or, get away from the battle somehow where, you don't feel you need to actually attack the bear? Anybody want to build on that?
Yeah, I can just say, like, definitely play intelligently. And don't think you can just go in and do something and be like, oh, well, I'll just go back to the save. It doesn't work like that at all. And the same thing too, like when you come across marauders or whoever, like kind of play intelligently, because like Andrew said before, their reputation, if you help somebody and then you try to help somebody else and they are fighting, that will come back and bite you in the ass.
Yep. Along with the character development, quickly mention too, for those of you that love, other games out there that limit the amount of inventory you can, carry, love or hate, it's part of what's in Eden. So when your character dies, let's say, that could be an interesting factor depending on, let's do a situation. You and your companions, let's say you have an android companion, are in the middle of a fight. Things are going terrible. Your character just got killed. You decide now you're playing the companion because he hasn't been promoted yet, but the battle's not over. So you get to play the companion out for this battle, and you decide, I probably want to run away, right? Because I want to save this companion. So you end up, getting lucky and playing a runaway card. The way the rules are set up for this death thing is later, if you go back, depending on what you were fighting against, they may have looted your character. Everything it had could be gone. Maybe if it's an animal, just foodstuffs and things like that. Maybe some armor and stuff got shredded or whatever. So death in the game is a very real element. But honestly, in the tabletop testing and even in a lot of the digital testing, after people got to the point where they understood that if it moves, it must die is not really a good option to choose, people started playing a little smarter, and we ended up, in the tabletop for months of real time, playing multiple times a week. People's characters lived on, and definitely, progressed, and went on to various trade skills and things like that. And in the digital games, I've seen the same thing where once they got past that, I have to kill everything. They started to experience the world like we would if we were really there, exploring, doing contracts, learning about the old world lore and what it's all about. So permadeath in our game, very big element.
And to that point, any player who is a veteran of any tabletop RPG, like Dungeons and Dragons, the most common one out there, usually when your character dies, it's dead. You have to re-roll a new character. And that's what this game is. That's the logic of this game. It is, on the back end, it's a tabletop RPG. That's what the rules are based on and everything else. It makes sense that when you die, your character dies, they are dead. Just like it is in any other tabletop RPG. You just re-roll a new character, you work it into your backstory if you want. Playing the sibling is the a common thing to do. And you play intelligently, and you play
Yep.
as the rules allow and as the setting sort of unfolds before you. Play intelligently and keep in mind you're part of a world, right? You're not just going through and murder hoboing everything in sight. It's not fun that way either. So
And
that's my take on it.
speaking of a tabletop turning digital, I know there's been other attempts, and Matthew said we don't skimp on the rules. Mike, what's the current running tally of the rule book pages? I know I can't lift it anymore.
Yeah, it's quite substantial. So we're in that neighborhood of about 1,200 pages of rules at this point. And when I say that, that's rules. It's not like a lot of fluff that describes the rules. It's core rules, and all that stuff is being ported over exactly as it's written for the tabletop, so that eventually, when we release the tabletop game, you'll be able to export characters from the digital game, play them on tabletop, and then re-import them back into the digital world. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention too about permadeath before I forget. We've mainly been talking about, circumstances of like an encounter taking your character out, right? Killing your character. But it was briefly mentioned, age is another factor in this game. So time really comes into play as you go out on these excursions. Certain amount of time will pass, and it's not what I would say easily predictable, because the system will roll and say, well, maybe only a day passed when you went from point A to point B, and the next time it'll tell you, several days have passed or whatever. So at the end of a 20-turn session, which is typical for the game, typically, it could be a matter of a few days to as much as a couple weeks of real time have passed. At the end of each session, one of the things the system does is it looks at your character and it makes a roll to see what overall happens to them, because just like in real life, many of us have known people of various younger ages that die for various reasons, right? Call it natural causes, or some inherent cause that, other than being attacked by a crazy bear or something, takes them out. So the game also simulates that as well. So you might end up during the end game where it actually tells you your character has become deceased. The nice part is there's a journal that details all your character history, and there'll be a big send off page where it talks about your final accolades and things like that. So you don't go unmissed. And of course, if you have a companion that can be promoted, then they'll take up the reins and continue, or you may decide to roll an entirely new character. But that's the way Eden is. It's just the idea that I used to promote to the team was, I called it organized chaos. So there's an unpredictability, even for myself, and I told the team this many times, we will not make a game that even us, as we play it, will know what happens, including the overall story in this game, because it's so unpredictable. It can go so many ways that, it makes it exciting for even us, even though we know some of the things that could happen. Will it happen or not? We don't know. But, permadeath is one of those things that tends to make a player, think a little bit before they do something.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day for being here to talk about the lore of Eden Falling. I hope everyone learning about the lore had fun. Um, just learning even just this small chunk of Eden Falling's lore. I know I did for one. If you want to learn more about Eden Falling and its lore, check out our website and also check out our Steam page and social medias to keep up to date with Eden Falling's status and updates.